Thank you, Mr. Chair, and also Ranking Member Brown. And I also really appreciate the bipartisan effort here. I don't completely see it here, but I know it exists.
The chairman's here.
Yes, exactly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome.
You know, when I was lieutenant governor, I did a lot of work on transportation issues, and, you know, certainly a lot of it in big cities and cities the size of Duluth, Minnesota and St. Cloud, Minnesota, but also cities the size of Marshall and Worthington, smaller communities, and then rural areas. And so I appreciate what both Senator Crapo and Senator Brown said about how this is an issue that isn't just a rural issue or an urban issue. And the one thing I remember the most hearing from all those county commissioners that I talked to who are trying to address transit and transportation issues is, like, we need the federal government to be a good partner on the funding side of this. And we can sort of talk about this, but until we're ready to kind of put our money where our mouth is on this, we're just going to be talking about it. So I hope that we can come together around this. I understand that this is a policy committee, but this is what I hear so much about. And so let me just dive in on one thing related to that, and maybe I'll direct this question to Mr. Bogren. The Department of Transportation recently solicited comments for their routes initiative, which is about providing transit opportunities in rural areas. And, you know, what I hear from a lot of my rural communities in Minnesota is that while this federal transportation funding is really important, for a small community to try to come up with the matching funds that are required, it's like a devilish choice, because, like, we want to help you, but we don't possibly have the tax base or the population to be able to support those matching dollars. So, and we're talking about places where people are a long way from the nearest hospital, working people who want to work but don't have a, I mean, it's just, it doesn't work. So could you just address that issue? I'd appreciate your thoughts on that.
Certainly, and I appreciate the question. Yes. This is a real challenge for rural transit systems. You've got managers of these systems that oftentimes maybe drive the vehicle in the afternoon,
right,
and then spend most of their evenings going to many of the small towns in their region hoping to get $1,000 just to do exactly what you're talking about and all the work that goes into that. You know, one of the things that we've called for in our plan is to be able to take into account poverty levels and the lack of health care. As rural hospitals are moving further and further, it's hard for folks on the East Coast to know, to understand that in many parts of the country, you might have a 2-hour drive to the nearest dialysis clinic.
Right.
That lack of health care is measured, and where we have that, along with certain poverty rates, we're calling for lower matching rates for those rural communities for that reason. I'd also echo what Mr. McKenna had to say about operating versus capital. Operating is critical to these systems, and any flexibility on that is also really helpful.